Every single year, we're dropping something like $30 billion on protein powders and supplements. But are they actually extending our health span? Well, welcome to this All Nutrition Explainer. I am so pumped to have you here today because, let's be honest, we're tackling a topic absolutely everyone has an opinion on, but very few have the actual data to back up. Today, we're going to uncover the real science behind protein isolates, those powders and shakes you see everywhere, versus whole foods when it comes to long-term health and longevity. Let's move past the hype and look straight at the science.
It's a massive question, right? Are your protein shakes actually helping you age better? Walk into literally any grocery store, or just scroll through your feed for 5 seconds, and you're going to see protein powders aggressively marketed as the ultimate hack for healthy aging and sports performance. But what happens when we strip away all that marketing? For this explainer, we're leaning on the All Nutrition platform, which actually synthesizes peer-reviewed clinical data so we can find the truth. We're going to separate those quick-fix fitness trends from the biological reality of how our bodies actually age.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our macro to micro investigation roadmap for today. We'll start off by looking at the evidence gap, then uncover the matrix effect. From there, we'll weigh plant versus animal protein, break down strategic timing and dosing, explore your shifting needs with age, and finally, help you personalize your protein strategy.
All right, Section 1, the protein evidence gap. Let's look at the data.
Take a look at this quote pulled directly from recent nutritional epidemiological publications. There is a significant disparity between the widespread use of protein isolates and the availability of long-term clinical data. I mean, wow, that is a massive reality check. We consume millions of pounds of this stuff globally, kind of just assuming we know exactly what it does to us over a lifetime. But the truth? Most of our current dietary recommendations are actually grounded in studies that use mixed, minimally processed whole foods, not those highly refined isolates.
And this builds into a really critical methodological split. On one side, we have short-term randomized controlled trials, or RCTs. These typically only last 4 to 21 weeks and usually measure very acute outcomes, like exactly how much muscle you synthesized right after a workout. On the totally opposite side, we have decades-long observational studies, like the famous Nurses' Health Study conducted by researchers at Harvard, which track chronic disease and longevity over a whole lifetime. This is super important, so let's be clear. We are looking at completely different study populations and methodologies here. We have short-term data on isolates for muscle building, sure, but to understand actual longevity, researchers have to rely on observational data of whole foods tracked over decades.
Moving to Section 2, unlocking the matrix effect. It's about way more than just macros.
This brings us to a, frankly, fascinating concept. The matrix effect essentially means that nutrients behave fundamentally differently when they are consumed in a complex food structure compared to when they are stripped away and totally isolated. Think of whole food as this beautifully complex, highly engineered architecture. It's not just some basic amino acid delivery vehicle. How your body actually unpacks and uses those nutrients changes entirely depending on the packaging it arrives in.
Notice what is conspicuously missing here. Isolates are entirely devoid of fibers, polyphenols, and that optimal digestion architecture. Now, food scientists are definitely trying to bridge this gap. For instance, there's a novel processing technique called cold plasma treatment. It literally unfolds the protein structures of plants and animals to expose enzyme cleavage sites, basically making those isolates way easier to digest. It's really cool tech, but even with advancements like that, isolates fundamentally lack natural nutrient synergy. When you eat traditional food pairings, like combining cereals and legumes together, their natural synergies actually improve how your body absorbs minerals like iron and zinc. You just can't completely replicate that magic in a lab-isolated powder.
Section 3, plant versus animal protein, choosing your source.
When we break down the specific sources, we've got whey protein, obviously famous for super fast digestion and high leucine content, making it awesome for acute muscle synthesis. Then we have soy protein, and finally, blended plant proteins, which usually require combinations of things like oat, wheat, and hemp just to get a complete amino acid profile. But, and this brilliantly illustrates a key point, long-term studies show absolutely no significant difference between soy and whey for actual gains in muscle mass and strength when you combine them with resistance training. The plant alternative totally holds its own over time. However, we do have to look at the whole picture here. If you are relying exclusively on plant-based proteins, whether we're talking isolates or whole foods, you can definitely run into specific deficiencies. Notably, vitamin B12 and creatine are predominantly found in animal products. Creatine especially has an incredibly high safety profile and is hugely effective not just for muscle support, but for cognitive function too. Because look, As amazing as broccoli is, it's just not going to give you a meaningful dose of creatine. So if you are strictly plant-based, supplementing these is an absolutely crucial strategy.
All right, Section 4, strategic timing and dosing. When and exactly how much? Now, what's really interesting about this is that number right there, 20 grams. This is your magic baseline. It is the critical minimum threshold per meal. Why does this matter? Well, a lot of people engage in what's essentially a grazing pattern, right? Snacking on maybe 5 or 10 grams of protein here and there throughout the whole day. But the clinical data shows us this is highly metabolically inefficient. If you don't hit that 20-gram threshold in a single sitting, you basically fail to sufficiently stimulate muscle protein synthesis.
So what does a biologically optimized day actually look like? Well, you start your morning with a high-protein breakfast. Think eggs, which evidence shows actually helps regulate your circadian rhythms and improves blood pressure way better than a high-carb breakfast. Then during your daytime meals, you remember that 20-gram minimum to avoid the grazing trap we just talked about. And then pre-sleep? This is wild. Consuming a 40-gram dose of protein right before bed increases your overnight muscle protein synthesis by roughly 33%. It literally shifts your body into this powerful, positive recovery state while you sleep.
Moving into Section 5, shifting needs with age, navigating your changing body. Take a look at this stark comparison, because health advice is definitely not one size fits all. For adults aged 50 to 65, lower protein intake, specifically keeping it under 10% of total energy, is actually associated with a major reduction in cancer-related mortality. But watch what happens next. The rules drastically flip as we cross that threshold of 66 years old. And it's super important to note that researchers are looking at entirely different study cohorts here. What protects a middle-aged metabolism from cancer is very, very different from what protects an elderly population from sarcopenia, which is that age-related muscle wasting. So for adults 66 and older, high protein intake becomes absolutely vital and is linked to significantly better overall health outcomes. Understanding which specific cohort you fall into totally dictates your dietary strategy.
And finally, Section 6, personalize your protein strategy. Let's put it all together.
Okay, here are your core takeaways from the all-nutrition analysis. Over the span of decades, observational data heavily favors plant proteins for overall longevity. But however you choose to get your protein, just remember that whole food matrices provide those crucial co-nutrients and regulate digestion in ways that powder simply can't. On a daily basis, try to hit that 20-gram minimum per meal, and definitely consider that 40-gram pre-sleep dose for recovery. As a general baseline, the standard recommendation is 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight per day. But remember, if you're an older adult, you'll want to bump that up to between 1.2 and 1.6 grams. Oh, and a quick note on gut health. Higher protein intake doesn't have to ruin your microbiome. As long as you're consuming it within a broader, healthy dietary pattern that's rich in fruits, veggies, and fiber, those negative changes are largely avoided.
Which leaves us with one final, absolutely essential question. What is your optimal protein strategy? As we've seen today, the science isn't static. It depends heavily on whether you're 35 and trying to build muscle, or 70 and trying to prevent muscle loss. To find exactly what works for your unique biology, I highly encourage you to head over to allnutrition.info. You can just plug in your specific context, your age, your weight, any health conditions you might have, and get personalized, evidence-based guidance directly synthesized from the latest clinical data. Don't just guess with your health. Let the science guide you. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep learning.